Welcome back to He's a Giant Special Edition. This is the He's a Giant Dumpster Fire edition. For those of you who understand and care, I am your host, Sal, here with my co host, Monty, coming to you live to cook these fools. What's going on, man?
What's going on, man? He's a giant dumpster fire. He's a giant fucking disappointment. Whatever you want to phrase it as, he is fucking made the wrong decision. That's where we're at right now, and he is going to regret this. Is what's happening.
He is going to ruin everything. Before we get started and go into our show, want to thank those of you who are here in the chat. Those of you viewing, we're going to give a few minutes for people to filter in. Um, if you have a chance, please like, subscribe. You know where to find us. Me and Monty at Queens_guy at MONTECRI5TO at He's a Giant Pod. And if you don't mind, please retweet the link to the show if you haven't already. Thank you guys. But yeah, man. So the big news is the season ends. The Giants conclude their dreadful season with the most losses in team history. They finished at 3-14 with the third overall pick in the NFL draft. They get beat with their whatever their first team is. They go out there and they get beat by the Philadelphia Eagles practice squad while trying, kind of. Um, Season's up, and then within, we the day we were all waiting for, right before the final game, Jake Glazer comes out, who usually is dead on, and says, "I think they're safe." And we're hearing reports from a lot of people that I think they're safe. A little bit of hope thrown our way by our friend Ricky, but proved to not be true. And then 8 a.m. the next morning, owner John Mara, right off the bat, rips out a statement. Uh, he issues it from the Giants official page saying they're coming back, and obviously sets off a maelstrom of responses. What we want to do before we get into anything, guys, is actually Monty was kind enough to cut up John Mara's impromptu press conference that he came out and gave. So we put that together for you guys. So I think that'll set the stage for the rest of our discussion today. But why don't we take a listen to what John Mara said? But before we do, I just ask you to do one thing, just for a moment. Pretend you don't know what John Mara is going to do. Pretend you don't know what decision he has made with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Pretend you're still waiting to hear his verdict. And the first thing you hear from him, there was no press release, but the first thing you hear are the words that he issues here as he talks to the press. And then tell me what you think. Why don't we play the piece?
That Brian's coach of the year, great draft class, but at the end of the day, you guys won 3 games. So how does that all
I'm
connect?
aware of how many games we've won, and obviously the results are not even close to what we want them to be, and they're going to have to get better if we're going to move on to year 4.
If you're going to draft a rookie quarterback and then change the head coach and GM after that, is this really a 2-year commitment to them?
I understand the question, but I'm not going to put any kind of time limit on it, but I certainly understand where you're going
We need
with
a
that.
quarterback. So how important is that decision going to be to keeping them here and seeing what they can do?
That's obviously the number one issue for us going into this offseason is to find our quarterback of the future, whether that be via the draft or acquiring a veteran. Is going to be up to them to decide ultimately.
The process being good, the coach, having it in there, the free agency being good, their process, all this stuff. How do you justify that? How did you get to 3-14 then?
Because we stunk this year. Okay, the results on the field were not what we wanted them to be. There were a number of factors that went into that. A lot of that has already been discussed with the coach and with Joe, and will continue to be discussed. And but I liked what I heard from them on Friday afternoon. I like what their plan is going forward, and we're going to stay with.
These guys come back on a hot seat now?
You guys are going to have them number one on the hot seat going forward. So no matter how I answer that question,
In your mind?
we're going to have to see. I'm going to have to be in a better mood this time next year than I am right now.
Friday that gives you
I'm not going to go into all the details.
But fans are going to want to hear something.
I understand that. Obviously, the quarterback is the big issue, and maybe he makes some other changes in the way he operates going forward. I've talked to him about do you really believe that it's in our best interest for you to continue calling the plays? I said, I'm not going to demand that you do one thing or the other, but are you better off letting somebody else call the plays? And that's a discussion that we're going to continue to have. There are issues like that we have to have some further discussion about. But at the end of the day, he's got to make the decision on whether he does that, on whether he wants to make replacements in the staff. That's got to be his decision at the end.
How long is this roster better than it was 3 years ago when these two took over this team?
I'm not sure I am all that confident that it's that much better. I think, though, with the draft class that we just had, again, it's very unusual that you have 6 draftees, all of whom you think are going to help us going forward. I thought that was a huge step. And the free agents that we picked up between Runyon and bringing Brian Burns in here, I think those are really going to help us going forward. I think once you solve the quarterback issue, I think a lot of these other things will improve.
How long will it take to improve the product, John?
It better not take too long, Bruce, because I've just about run out of patience.
There it is.
First of all, thanks to Monty for cutting that together. He's a very talented IT guy. If you guys had just seen that, which was really the cut up combined pieces of his impromptu press meeting, and you didn't know what his verdict was, Monty, what if I asked you to just watch that and then tell me what he does next, what would you have guessed?
I would have guessed this sounds like a guy that didn't have a lot of conviction in his head coach or GM, which means he's probably going to move forward and fire him. If I wasn't able to pick out those context clues of him just talking about them like they're still here, everything else was like he's impatient. He thinks we have gone backwards or potentially in the same place we were 3 years ago. He's thinking he is ready to take away duties from our head coach because he's questioning if he's able to do it. There's a lot in there, and none of it really seems as a ringing endorsement. And there isn't really anything I caught out of there. The only thing I didn't really include in that was basically just his minute opening monologue to the press. But that was basically as far as all the clips that the SNY people put out, that's all of them. It's bad. It's a bad look.
He sounds like a man who, I mean, the kicker to me is when they ask him about the state of the roster compared to when these men took over, and he pauses and says, I'm not sure I'm confident the roster is better than 3 years ago when they took over or whatever it was, He sounds, and I agree with him, right? John Mara, and other than what he did, what he said, he sounded like somebody in Spaces who was pissed off at how awful this product is. He sounded like a man who was aggravated, who was saying this is a team with a head coach who doesn't have his guys prepared, who probably shouldn't be calling plays, who needs to make changes to his staff. He's talking about a roster that's not as good as may not even be as good as when these guys took over. He's talking about a team that has no quarterback, a team that better figure it out, a team that needs to start winning. And he said we were 3-14 because we stunk.
Yeah,
This is the owner. We stunk. These are the things he said. And he even acknowledges they got to figure out quarterback. They got to get one. Whether it's a free agent, veteran, or in the draft, that's up to them, but they got to figure it out. And then he says, well, I'm running out of patience. They better win. Those two things are not really congruent, by the way. Like, unless you're cutting out the drafted young quarterbacks and you're thinking just free agent veteran or whatever veteran. What he said and how he described his opinion of the team would make you think this guy is ready to burn it down. And instead, he gives them a vote of confidence and brings them back. And somehow simultaneously tells them, I'm expecting you to win now.
Yep. I think, you and I, Sal, we talked about this. We were talking a little bit earlier today about, our thoughts on what John Mayer is doing and why he's doing it. I think there's a few reasons, obviously, I think he just doesn't want to seem like a reactionary owner. I think he doesn't want to have to go through this whole process again. I think he hates doing it. He hates firing people. He hates going through the hiring process. All that stuff bothers him. But there's some pushback that that John Mayer is not going to expect like big results this year. And everything I heard in there says otherwise. And everything we're hearing from a guy like Mike Garafolo, something you kind of pointed out, and I agree with, is I feel like part of the reason they didn't make this change was because he knows if we make a change, it means starting over. And he wants results now. And he sees the fastest path to results now as rolling with the same regime, because in that case, you don't have to start over. And he doesn't want to start over. So he's basically saying, it's year 4, get results like it's year 4.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the conclusion I came to after listening to that a few times, talking to you. This is the man who understands that the roster's terrible, the team's terrible, that has a no quarterback. I mean, just stop there for a second. Terrible roster, not better than a few years ago. Tons of money and draft capital spent, still not better. No quarterback, no solution in sight, and they stink. That's the current state of affairs. That's his assessment of where they are, which is 100% accurate. And then he turns around and he's basically saying, "I'm running out of patience." I don't blame him. He spent a ton of money for these, and a ton of time and on these guys, but he wants his results. Like an impetulant child. He has decided, well, I've waited long enough. I want my cookie now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's telling them. I want my cookie now. I want my results right away. And I don't feel like taking the information that I literally just put out of my own mouth and processing it to reach the proper conclusion. What I feel like doing is just saying it to tell you how I feel, and then turning around and saying, I want you to stay here because you're my closest path to getting some sort of gratifying result now. And I'm going to tell you, go get those gratifying results. Oh, by the way, he wouldn't comment on how stable they are, how safe they are, if they take a young quarterback. He wouldn't say any of that. And he made it very clear, like, nobody's really safe beyond this. I'm giving you one last shot here to prove to me that you can win. Mike Garafolo comes out, as you mentioned, and basically says, there's a playoff mandate. I know, John Mara, this means that the playoff mandate is here. He said it twice.
Mm-hmm.
And he was reading between the lines a little bit, obviously, but nobody is more plugged in the national press when it comes to the Giants than Mike Garafolo. And he made it very clear. And when he heard John Mara speak, he's like, "Well, there it is. I know what this means. It means they have a playoff mandate." Now that then he can't. He said, "I don't necessarily mean if they win like 8 or 9 games and just barely miss the playoffs that means everybody's getting fired." But you get the picture.
Yeah.
The expectation is they're right there. They either make it or they're right on the cusp. This is a team that won 3 games with what looks like the worst roster in the game, and next year have the hardest schedule in the NFL. They're scheduled strength based on the 2024 team records. They have the hardest record in the NFL with the worst team, and they have no solution at quarterback. They do not possess the number 1 pick. They possess the number 3 overall pick in a 2 quarterback class. They are going to start. My guess is when Vegas comes out with over unders on win totals, they're going to start around 4.5 to 5 wins, and they got to get to like 9 somehow.
And I think something worth mentioning too, based off last year's record, it is the hardest schedule in the NFL. And obviously there's the other side of this with regression to teams and stuff like that. But there is clear teams that are going to get better on that schedule. I think the number one example being the San Francisco 49ers. We are playing the San Francisco 49ers as the 4th place team in the NFC West. We have to face the San Francisco 49ers, which is going to be a very good team next year. And we are stuck facing them. And, this is not like going to be some great team or anything, but I think a lot of us expect the New England Patriots to be a much better team next year than they were this year. They a lot of trust in their quarterback, and you tend to see those bit when you find your quarterback, you see that second year jump a lot of times for these teams. So, at some point we'll go over the full schedule and we're close to the season, but it does not look good for us. One other thing I wanted to comment on, going over John Mara's comments. First of all, shout out to the beat that was there. They asked some really good questions, and I think they kind of caught on that John Mara was answering them candidly and just kept firing it at him, and he kept answering them. But the one question he really just refused to answer, which was interesting to me, was the exact question I would have asked him, and that is, you said everything. You said that you did everything you could to screw up Daniel Jones. Part of that was moving on from a head coach after the first year after drafting Daniel Jones. Like, are you willing to commit to 2 years past, and he wasn't. Like, he basically, he ultimately tried to avoid the question, but kind of ended with, no, I'm not willing to give that commitment. So it's like he acknowledged why he's asking the question. He clearly understands that this could be a big issue and that could be a real reality. He just doesn't care. He just wants to do it his way and understands that that's how this thing could end up playing out, and he just doesn't care.
I think it's important at this point to start gaming out how this can go down, because this could be really an epic disaster. Like, this could be like the Titanic of this organization for a decade. The last two times that he did this, meaning Mara, with a general manager, where he essentially told him, you got one last shot, was essentially going into 2016 and to some extent into 2021. In 2016, we were coming off the heels of a season which was probably Eli's last great season of football, where the team lost a bunch of games because they had a terrible defense, although Eli was still good. And they fired longtime coach Tom Coughlin and promoted offensive coordinator Ben McAdoo. Jerry Reese at that point was allowed to stay despite Coughlin getting fired, and that's where you got the famous clip of Tom Coughlin giving the getting a goodbye ceremony despite being fired, and then walking off the stage, Mara standing up to shake his hand, and Coughlin just walking right by him.
Yep.
Reese stays on essentially as a lame duck GM at that point, and is told, you got to fix this. So what did Reese do? Do you remember that offseason? He spent like a drunken sailor,
Mm-hmm.
right? He brought in tons of players on defense, made moves. I think, wasn't that the year that they paid for Brandon Marshall?
Brandon Marshall was the next year. That was the year they paid for Janoris Jenkins, Olivier Vernon,
Right,
Damian Harrison,
right.
and
They went all out
others.
on the.
Yeah.
They went all out. And of course, I think they went 10-6 the next season. They made the
Mm-hmm.
playoffs, and that was the boat game. The boat trip incident and all that. Whatever. But it set the team back, and 2016 they made the playoffs. 2017 it all came falling apart because those free agent players all regressed, and they had a ton of money spent. Eli continued to regress. You guys remember the story. And Reese is fired after the Geno Smith game. 2021, Dave Gettleman's fourth year as general manager. After the 2026-10 season, they want to see results. Gettleman almost got fired 2 years prior to that when he threw Pat Shermer under the bus. Same kind of thing. We want to see a win now. We've had 2 years of Jones. He's here. Joe Judge's his second year. Let's go win. And Gettleman spends like a lunatic. Gives him that massive contract to Kenny Galladay. I think it was 4 for 72. Gives a contract to Adoree Jackson. He has to get rid of Kevin Zeitler to pay for it, which was a disaster. He pays for Kyle Rudolph, finds out he has a Lisfranc fracture, and says, no, 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 Giants way. You still get to be here and collect money. He, takes in the draft. Micah Parsons falls to him, doesn't take him. Rashawn Slater falls to him, doesn't take him. Wanted Smitty, gets jumped because everybody knows he wanted Smitty, so he trades down. But he, instead of trading down and collecting the pick for next year and some assets and taking the BPA, what does he do? He takes Kadarius Toney
Because they wanted
because
a wide receiver no matter
because
what.
they wanted a wide receiver to prove that they could win with Daniel Jones along with Kenny Galladay. Then they take, you guys remember, this is a terrible draft class. Azeez Ojulari was the only one who actually ever did anything. They trade up to get Aaron Robinson. Poor guy got hurt. They took Ellerson Smith off the Senior Bowl. He never did anything. Then they took Gary Brightwell and they took for Darius Williams. They took 4 players before, and then of course, after all of those guys, Trey Smith gets drafted by by the Chiefs,
Yep.
which we'll get back to. And of course, it all falls apart in 21. This sure feels like we're about to relive 2016 and 2021 all over again. A GM being told, you need to win now. This is it. The team clearly not in position to do it. The GM has to save his job. What do you think is about to happen?
Yeah. And, I know everyone heard Joe Shane's quote about, I have too much respect for the Maras to, throw a Hail Mary. First of all, I'll believe it when I see it because he's on the hot seat. And, they're talking about Talking Giants. I think they phrased it a good way was, I would do the same thing. And I agree. If I was in his position, I would throw a Hail Mary. I can't blame him for doing it. I can blame John Mara for putting him in a position where he's going to do it. And I'll be honest with you, he talks about, I have too much respect for the Maras to do that. Do you think that that's not what John Mara wants? Because I think that's exactly what John Mara wants. I think John Mara wants to see a competitive football team, and he doesn't give a shit and has never given a shit about taking shortcuts. He has shown that time after time again. Not only is he okay with taking shortcuts, I think he is somebody who has been very much behind the Giants doing this. I think he had a big influence in Jerry Reese doing that because there was a lot of pressure for everybody within the organization. Jerry Reese, but everybody felt the pressure to try to win with Eli at the end of his career. So I think top to bottom, they made a decision to overpay. With Joe Judge, they, just missed the playoffs. The Eagles don't tank. Maybe, they make the playoffs. They're, let's ignore the fact that they would have made the playoffs going like 8-8 or whatever it was. But, they were close. And, Joe Judge had a promising first year and, they had their quarterback on a rookie deal. So they were like, know what? Let's go all in. Fuck that the salary cap went backwards because of COVID. We're going to put money into the future and go all in. We're going to restructure everything. And the narrative for a lot of it was, hey, John Mara's letting him spend. He's opening up his wallet and he's ready to let him do this. And when you have to restructure as much money as they did that year, that doesn't happen without the owner on board and give as much signing bonus money without the owner on board, because that is a lot of money that needs to go in escrow right up front in both cases. So again, when he says I have too much respect for John Mara isn't the person who's going to step in and stop him spending a drunken sailor. That's what John Mara. It's exactly what John Mara wants to do. John Mara is the every fan on Twitter who wants to get the top free agent every single year and just says cap's fake and let's be a high spender. That's John Mara. And so yeah, he can say whatever he wants about that, but I tell you what, I'm fully expecting a spending spree.
I mean, I think we should probably think about how this plays out at this point, and it's worth looking at both how they made handle this in free agency and the draft, because people are asking, and I think we have planned on discussing this today. We'll obviously go into more details later as we get into we finish up our draft work and we get into more depth. But I'm going to give you 2 terrifying numbers to start the process, because free agency comes first, right? And we'll have to talk about the coaches in a second, but Here's two numbers that should petrify you as a Giants fan. Here's the Giants cap space going into 2025. 53.5 million. Not bad. Kind of middle of the pack in the NFL. Not enough to go crazy, right? Here's how much cap space they have in 2026. $141 million projected. You know what that looks like to me? That looks like a gigantic line of credit. That if I'm a GM on the hot seat and I know I'm on my last legs and I'm not responsible for paying back that line of credit, I'm tapping into that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. And if you
That
need it, you can keep tapping it in the future.
that that $87 million discrepancy from next year to the year after, not even including restructures and things like that right now, that to me looks like a massive line of credit that Joe Shane, who previously has preached his quote process that his biggest fans rave about, where he doesn't borrow from the future, blah, 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 blah. Do you really think he's going to hold on to that process now, Monty, with the roster and the state it's in and a mandate to win against that schedule? Or is he going to rip into that line of credit?
I think he'll rip in that line of credit. I'll also say I think all that is really overblown. I don't think that he did it as much as his predecessor, Dave Gettleman, and I don't think he does it to the level of like the competitors around this league, like the Philadelphia Eagles and whatnot. But he spent the fourth most money last offseason in the entire NFL. We went into the season, by week 3, we weren't calling up players off the practice squad and we're going like without players that we could have in our active roster because they didn't want to call up players from the practice squad because they were so short in money. This was like week 3. This was the type of shit that was happening under Dave Gettleman. Like, this is absurd how tight that they're walking with this money and how they've been doing it. And that was with Darren Waller retiring, who they were holding out hope played for them. So I don't even know what their plan would have been if he didn't retire. Like he spent a ton of money the year before. I mean, I know a lot of it was on our own players, but he spent, I don't know the exact numbers in front of me, but it was definitely within the top 5 of the NFL as far as like guaranteed money. He ended up between Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence, Daniel James, Saquon Barkley, Bobby Okereke, Darren Waller restructure and whatnot. Like, there was like the only year that he didn't do that at all was the first year. And credit to him, he did a great job. Came in here, set himself up in a great place going the next year by just taking his medicine and taking his lumps and being really got out of the Dave Gettleman mess in basically 1 year, and it could have taken multiple if he didn't approach it the way he did. But he completely blown that up since then. And like I said, really the only thing is he hasn't really done void years. That's really the only thing he's totally avoided because he's restructured guys every year, basically. Except for the first year, I think he restructured guys, just he tried not to. And he's backloaded every one of these deals. So, like, why isn't he going to borrow from the future? He definitely is. It's just question is he going to start using void years to do it?
He probably will. And I think at this point, I think I'm not, I don't want to get too deep into a cap discussion, but there's nothing wrong with backloading contracts. In general, the value of the money today is more than it is in the future. The cap tends to go up, so the fraction of that money as a portion of the cap tends to go down. It's okay to backload, but there's a time and place for it. I think when you have already built out your roster well through the draft and your team is ready to compete, that's a perfect time to start doing it. You want to keep adding talent to supplement a strong core. You cannot do this to make up for a lack of talent on your roster from the draft because this is going to blow up in your face. These are generally older players. They've now been paid. That definitely has an effect on a lot of people. Injuries start to mount and there's nothing underneath them, right? There's no core to hold them up. There's no foundation. So this is a shaky way to build. And he has clearly not built a draft foundation. I think that's the concern. This is exactly what Gettleman did. He did not have a draft foundation and then started spending. Twice he went on spending sprees. You cannot spend like this on shaky cores, or it will fall apart, and it will take the next person who takes over for your mess a couple of years to clean out. That's kind of where we're headed right now, because John Mara said, you get one last shot, you and your buddy. I'm keeping you together, which means I expect the two of you to figure this out together and win together. Oh, by the way, you got to get a quarterback too, because we don't have a single quarterback on the roster not named Tommy DeVito. So this is all set up for it. I mean, this is just like a perfect triangulation heading towards an epic disaster. This is bad news, and there are not a lot of outs to this to fix this. But on top of everything, Monty, he mentioned in his press conference, I told Brian Dable, "Hey, are you sure you want to call plays? Are you sure that's in the best interest of the team?" I agree with John Mara there. I think his calling plays has been atrocious. I think it has definitely hurt. But he's telling him that. So what is he saying? I need you to relinquish play calling duties. Well, you know what? He just took it away from Mike Kafka after Mike Kafka having it for a couple of years. Last year, Mike Kafka famously wanted to leave for the Seattle offensive coordinator position after they interviewed him for their head coaching job, liked him a lot, asked him at the interview if you would take the OC job if we offered it to you, if you don't get the head coaching job, which he clearly said yes. And then when he came back, they asked for permission to interview him again, and there were plenty, and that basically implies that they knew that he would take the job. So they asked for permission, and the Giants still declined it. Why? Because they had already made a shit show of losing Wink Martindale, right? And had already fired Bobby Johnson. So they held on to him for optics, gave him a contract extension, it sounds like, for a year, made him assistant head coach, but took away his play calling duties. Mike Kafka is an experienced play caller. He's getting interviews for head coaching gigs at Chicago, New Orleans. The Seattle OC position is again open. Ryan Grubb just got fired. We know that Mike Kafka's brother lives in Seattle. He's also from Chicago. He's a Chicago kid who grew up a Bears fan. His wife's from Chicago. Went to Northwestern. There's a decent chance that he's offered an OC job, even if he doesn't get a head coaching job, which I don't know if he will. I doubt it, honestly. But I hope he does for his sake. I hope he does for our sake. We get 2 comp picks for that. But if he doesn't, wouldn't you say the odds are pretty good that he gets offered an OC job somewhere that he would like Seattle or Chicago, maybe New Orleans?
There is a lack of experienced play callers out there and a lack of, up and coming, like talented offensive minds in this league. And he checks both those boxes. There's going to be people who want him. And, the only year that Mike Kafka had play calling uninterrupted, we had a top 5 red zone offense in the NFL. We haven't been able to come close to that outside of this. This year, we were the worst red zone offense in the NFL. We were the worst red zone offense in the NFL before we brought in Mike Kafka. And we were pretty damn bad in 2023, where, granted, he was a play caller, but they were taking it away from him every other week, seemingly. So hard to really say how much of that was his fault when that was starting seemingly as early as week 3 in 2023. So, yes, to answer your question, I think a lot of people would like Mike Kafka as an offensive coordinator. The question is for us is if we need a play caller, I don't know. Can you go back to Mike Kafka? I don't know if you can. I don't know if
And do you hold him hostage again, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you do this again? Where if he says, "Look, I'm a good soldier here. I put up with it the last couple of years, but I really want to get a long-term job as an OC somewhere else." They're asking for permission. Are you going to block him a second year in a row? Is it? I mean, while having him not have play calling duties, while ripping away experience from him, can you imagine what they would look like to the rest of the league at this point? It would be
Yeah.
even worse. I think you almost have to let him go, right? If he wants to leave, you almost have to let him go. I don't see how they can keep him if he wants to leave, and I don't know why he would want to stay. So, who takes over play calling? Is it Shea Tierney? Is he the new play caller?
Yeah.
Do you go get you try to get Davis Webb in here? Future head coach Davis Webb, and who's never called plays before, who's obviously a promising young coach, but who is doing this is the question in this must-win season.
Do you bring in Ken Dorsey, who's been a total disaster play calling in both Buffalo and Cleveland? Like, It's tough. It's not easy to find good play callers in this league. We have one on our team, but we took play calling away from him. You know, our head coach is a good play caller when he's not a head coach. Doesn't seem like he's such a good play caller while he's also trying to.
The owner is not a happy man, you know,
doesn't
with him
seem
doing
very
that.
be good at it when he's balancing responsibilities. Seems like there's a lot of concern internally within the Giants that he is unable to balance those two responsibilities.
So you have I think there's a pretty decent chance that you're going to have to change OCs, right? At this point, I think Kafka wants out. Nobody can blame that man for wanting out. He wanted out last year. I think he'll get an opportunity. I don't know for sure. Maybe he doesn't. Who knows? Maybe he has no choice and he just comes back. But if he does have an opportunity to leave and he wants to leave and some other team asks for permission to interview him slash hire him as an OC, I don't think the Giants are in a position right now to say no to him. I think they've burned that bridge. And if so, now you're out an OC most likely, unless you want to be a complete jackass, right? Unless you want to be the worst people in the world and just force him to say again against his will.
Like
Let's
maybe he'd want to be play caller if we give it back to him, but I don't know. I just doesn't seem to make sense for either side.
but for what?
And
We'll play that out. He knows what's going on here. He knows he knows what the situation is. Even if he gets a play calling job back, right? Which by the way is awkward to begin with, right?
really awkward.
And then he does it, and then they're predictably bad. Even if Brian Dable gets fired halfway through the season and Mike Kafka takes over as head coach for half a year, he's gonna get canned at the end of the year. That's not job security. That's terrible for your career. Wouldn't you rather, if you were him, just get a fresh start somewhere else where you're calling plays at a place like Seattle where you have a 3-year contract in place? You can settle in and be a year away from this dumpster fire and then have a chance to maybe reset and look for jobs as a head coach later. That seems like a more sound decision.
And they treated Mike Kafka like shit last year or 2023 from what it sounded like is he was motherfucking Kafka and questioning every single time like we didn't get a third down or fucked up in the red zone or whatever it may be. It sounded like a really toxic, situation to be in. And yeah, I don't know if Kafka wants to have every single one of his play calls questioned again. I think it's works out better to be in a place like Seattle where I'll own the offense, you'll own the defense, and we'll collaborate.
So we don't know for a fact that he's going to leave, but the writing's on the wall. It's been on the wall since last year. And I think there's a better than 50-50 shot that he's out of here of his own volition to go take a lateral job, hopefully a head coaching job for everybody's sake, but a lateral job most likely as an OC elsewhere. Let's just assume that's what happened, right? Because I think it's a more likely proposition than him coming back. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. John Mara basically said, change your staff. That I'm sick and tired of watching teams go up and down the field on our defense. He actually said those words. And then he talked about changing the staff. He basically told Brian Daboll, fire the DC in almost direct language to the press. He said, change this guy, Bowen.
Yeah.
This 1-year DC after you, Brian Daboll, had a hissy fit and got rid of the other guy. I don't care what people say about Wink Martindale, and there are people who want to sell the idea that it was his fault, and I wasn't in the room. I don't know whose fault it was. I don't care. What I know is Wink Martindale was a guy who was doing his job pretty well. That defense was playing as well as could be expected given the talent he was handed. They were the reasons they were the reason this team was in games. People like to point to their defensive rankings and say, "Well, he wasn't good." Really, he was a great coach in Baltimore. He suddenly forgot how to coach. Maybe their defense was not ranked really high because they were always on the frickin' field because
Also,
their offense couldn't even move the ball at all.
Let's not forget we led the NFL in turnovers his final year here, and I don't remember the exact stat, but I'm pretty sure I saw we were the only team to miss the playoffs after leading the NFL in turnovers.
We also went and drafted a bunch of players like Deontay Banks, Trey Hawkins and others that would fit his system. He leaves. We get this guy Bowen in. I agree. His defense is terrible. He's not a very good coach. We kind of knew that when he was hired. He was like their 5th choice or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going to fire that guy too. So you very well may lose Kafka because he wants to leave. You're probably going to move on from Bowen. It doesn't seem like they want to fire him because then they have to pay him. They're probably praying that Mike Vrabel gets the job in New England
and
he
for
just takes him.
optics.
enter optics and say, "Oh yeah, well, we're going to let you go."
I think exactly what they're doing, and I think that job's going to be. I think Vrabel's going to be hired very soon, and I think that that's what they're banking on.
Okay, you now have a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator for the second year in a row. You have new coordinators. I mean, I guess the OC, this would be the first time it's turned over, but you have new coordinators for the
At
second
least
year in a
two of
row.
them for the second year in a row.
Right. Yeah. Two new coordinators, most likely going into your fourth season, you know, on a win now mandate coming off a 3-14 season. Just think about that for a second. And one of them has to take over play calling.
Yeah, it's a really bad look. It was a bad look last year. It's even a worse look this year in the sense of just like what's the benefit of having this guy around? He can't pick. This isn't even just relationship. Now it's just he picked a bad staff. He picked a bad coordinator last year, and he wasn't good enough at his job of being. He's basically firing himself as offensive coordinator. Like that's really like Kafka was just here, but Kafka's wants to move on to greener pastures, but it's really he's firing himself as play caller. That's what's going on. So yeah, man, it's bad. I do think that I think they'll probably have some better luck this time around finding a defensive coordinator just because it seems like there's a lot of good names out there. So hopefully you can end up with one of them, and a lot of them aren't just necessarily like first time guys. And I think that's the worst type of person to try to hire because it's just bad for both sides. Like the Giants don't have time to groom a new guy, and the new guy doesn't have time to figure himself out and develop himself when you're working with a guy in a hot seat. So it's just a bad fit all around. Hey man, it's really, really fucking bad. It doesn't make any sense. I don't think anyone feels good about the idea that we are keeping the head coach and GM and blaming essentially the coordinators. I think everyone accepts that like Shane Bowen wasn't a good coordinator, but like last year wasn't Mike Kafka's fault. Like I don't think anyone's sitting here like, oh, that's all we needed to change.
Yeah. So basically, and now we should get into the details. But to summarize where we are, we finished 3-14, worst season in the history of this organization. Somehow still only land third overall pick. Mara's furious, says they suck, demands that they start winning, puts a mandate on them, but keeps these guys employed. They're now on a lifeline, hanging on by a thread, and they're probably going to lose their coordinators. That's where we are. So let's talk about what they're going to do, because I think this is the situation you and I were trying to avoid. When the discussion in Giants land the last few weeks, the last month or so was going on, I think you and I were a minority in our view. The prevailing narrative that was initiated was that everybody agreed the best thing was to fire them both and start over. That was a ubiquitous view. Everybody's like, these guys have had 3 years. They've created a damn mess of things. They're not very good at their jobs. Cleanest thing to do is move on. Let a new GM come in, decide, does he want to take a quarterback? Does he not want to take a quarterback? Reassess the roster, all that stuff, right? That new guy gets to do. But the narrative that spread amongst the Giants world the last few weeks that we pushed back on was that the second best thing to do would be to bring them both back. That the worst thing possible was to keep Shane and fire Daboll. You don't want to do that. You want to avoid that. You want to either get rid of them both or keep them both. That was the narrative, and people ran with it. And I remember you and I pushing back and saying, wait a minute, that is not the second worst outcome. Actually, that's not the worst thing. Actually, if you want to commit to Shane, but you want to rebuild and say we're going to reassess things and maybe even take a quarterback, it's actually desirable to have a new head coach, right? You want to reset somewhere because if you're going to especially if you're going to go for it and try to get a young quarterback, especially for that purpose, if you got a new head coach in here, as bad as Joe Shane is, if you got a new head coach in here, and then you took a quarterback, you would give that coach a couple of years, right? Realistically, there would be much less pressure coming into this season to win now. There would be much less pressure to provide immediate gratification type results for John Mara. And I think more of a focus on let's fix what we have. Let's get the young quarterback in here. Let's build and let's give this at least 2 years to see what it looks like. And if it fails after 2 years, fine. People get fired. 2 years of quarterback assessments done. There's a lot of good information in that period. That actually was the second best option, not bringing them both back, despite what anybody told you guys. That was the second best option. You now got what people thought was the second best option. Now that they're both back. And guess what? What did you think was going to happen? Why would they both come back? What do you think John Mara would have intended by bringing them back? The intention would be, I'm bringing you back to provide me with results next year. Go provide me with results. And here we are.
Correct. We went with the much, much more dangerous option, and that is putting a GM who's desperate out there. And don't get me wrong, you still would have had Joe Schoen. He still would have been desperate, but it's a different level of desperate when he and the head coach he is tied to now are both on the hot seat. Getting a quarterback suddenly becomes you have no commitment to the head coach who's drafting this guy, and you're fully risking if this guy doesn't take over the world and save these guys' jobs. You're asking a rookie quarterback to save these guys' job by at least being in the hunt for the playoffs, like week 16, 17 and whatnot. He is going to have a new coach and probably a new GM going in next year. And I think that's the other thing that people like. I do think that if this blows up, you probably end up with a new head coach and new GM. And I understand that's appealing people, but that also isn't guaranteed. There's a world where Joe Schoen has a good draft like it did this year. It looks good on paper year one. And be like, hey, well, that's 2 in a row. Like he just drafted a quarterback, but we're not getting the results. Like, I like Joe Schoen, but I don't think Brian Daboll's it. And that is extra worst case scenario because now we're just doing it a year late. So I'll say I was mostly like on the same page as everyone for a while. Like my take, and I stand by this take, was either fire them both or bring them both back with a commitment. You have to have enough conviction in these guys that you're going to bring them back to give them an extension. If you're not willing to give them an extension, then you have to fire them. That tells you everything you need to know. But if you really feel like you have to bring them back, then you got to extend these guys. And John Mara does not have the conviction to extend these guys. That is clear. And they brought him back anyway. That's the issue. And I'm total agreement with people that either one of these scenarios are awful. Don't get me wrong. Anything other than a house cleaning is a terrible scenario. But the one we are currently in is the most dangerous scenario for this franchise and can play out very, very poorly for us. I am very nervous as a Giants fan for what is going to happen this offseason.
But Monty, it was always going to be this though. Like it was right to say that if you're going to bring them back because you want them to be the ones who continue a rebuild and commit to them, right? That you can acknowledge that mistakes were made, but that in general you have a lot of faith in them. You will give them the time required. I mean, I'm actually kind of okay with that. Like, I don't like it, but that's fine. Like, that's acknowledging your reality. But but that was never going to be the reality John Mara was going to live in, right? If he was going to bring them back, it was always going to be because I want to see this through to the end, and I see the end coming up. So give me a good ending, is what he's saying. I mean, in his warped mind, he probably thinks this is something similar to 2006 going into 2007 with Tom Coughlin, where Tom Coughlin was on the hot seat, and he had to fight for his job and show John Mara that he was going to change his ways and start the players council and all that stuff, and that somehow that magically led to the Super Bowl victory of 2007. I think the part that I bet you he thinks like that, But what John Mara doesn't remember for some reason is that Tom Coughlin went to the playoffs the 2 years prior to that. Like, he was a winning coach. He wasn't a losing coach. The standards were just higher in those days.
The reality is last year was the Tom Coughlin year. He got his new coordinators. You know, they had to have a heart to heart about, you know, how he's handling his staff, how he's going to change moving forward. There was real issues with Brian Daboll last year. As much as the Giants cronies wanted to shape this and blame it all on Wink, and I'm not absolving Wink Martindale. I'm just saying Brian Daboll has had a lot of blame in everything that went down off season. He was not the only person that was upset with him. Mike Kafka was upset with him. Thomas McGahee was upset with him, and others. You heard plenty of it. And last season was, all right, Brian Daboll, figure it out. Figure it out. This is your opportunity. And he didn't figure it out. That was the year. He's not Tom Coughlin. I know we all wanted him to be Tom Coughlin, but he's not. And you're right. Now he's looking at it all over again, when the reality is we already figured it out. We already, like, this year was the year to figure out who Brian Daboll was.
So all of that stuff we just said, I don't think there's much we're saying that's not shared by essentially the majority, if not everybody, in Giants fan land, right? Everybody's kind of slowly dealing with this reality. It's amazing how Mara is in opposition to essentially the entire fan base. I don't think there are many people I've come across who think this is the right decision, but it is the decision he has come to. This is where we are, and he clearly wants to win. And he says find a quarterback, but he didn't say young. He said be it in the draft or a veteran.
Mm-hmm.
We know the roster is crappy. We're going to lose Darius Slayton if they don't re-sign him, and he's our wide receiver too. We're probably going to need a wide receiver. There are 2 free agents in this class coming up, and I think we should probably get into this now, who I think that if you're deciding to spend money are guys that they're going to take a good hard look at. The one everybody knows, that everybody talks about, is T. Higgins. T. Higgins, obviously he's only 26 years old, the wide receiver 2 for the Cincinnati Bengals, but he was wide receiver 1 for 1 whole year before Jamar Chase got there. He's a good receiver, no doubt about it, right? T. Higgins is
Very
a
good.
solid NFL receiver.
Devontae Smith level type, kind of around there.
Yeah, good route runner, pretty decent outside receiver.
50-50 balls, all that.
Right. Not the big explosive playmaker that obviously Jamar is, that Malik Neighbors is, but Malik Neighbors is a lot like Jamar in many ways in his explosive ability. And you can make a pretty reasonable argument that, hey, T. Higgins was a perfect complement to Jamar Chase. Why couldn't he be that for Malik Neighbors, right?
Mm-hmm.
T. Higgins is going to be the most coveted wide receiver on the market. Using the PFF estimator of free agency, we did this last year too. They're estimating his contract value being 4 years, $28 million per year, which is 4 years, $112 million. That's up there. I mean, that would probably be about a top 10 wide receiver contract. It's up there. There is such a thing as the Joe Shane tax that I think we're going to start learning about this year.
Yeah.
Every free agent and every agent and every team in the NFL knows exactly what we're talking about, that they think the Giants are crazy. They can't believe they're putting themselves in this situation. But if you're a free agent and you're an agency, you know this guy's desperate. He needs talent because he has not acquired it himself the way you're supposed to through the draft. He has fallen short. He needs to show victories now. He is going to pay through his nose to get talent, and they will tax him for it. Would it shock you if T. Higgins, by virtue of the Joe Shane tax and by virtue of having a market, teams like New England who have their quarterback, little bit of a market, Joe Shane tax, if he gets a deal over $30 million per year from the Giants, would that shock you at all?
No, I think it's in the territory of what he's gonna get anyway. But I mean, that's what you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to give him the most guaranteed money. You have to give him the most money per year if you want to bring him in. He's not gonna give you any discount. It's funny. I don't know if you saw this. Did you see who PFF's free agent comparison was for T. Higgins?
Yeah, it's Kenny Galladay.
Kenny Galladay, 2021.
He's
I had-
he's a better player than Kenny Galladay.
he is, and he's not coming off injury. He's coming off the best season of his career. But man, that makes you feel great as a Giants fan, huh?
It's deja vu all over again. So I think the reason we mention this is I'm not advocating for T. Higgins at all. I think that, you really shouldn't be doing this in the position the Giants are in. But John Mara doesn't seem to know what position we're in. He seems to think we're ready to go for it. So, and Joe Shane knows his job is on the line going forward. So T. Higgins is somebody you should look for. If they decide to overpay T. Higgins, which in my opinion, would be like anything over 28 million per year, you can estimate it might be a little bit more, but like if they gave him that 4 year, hundred and something $1 million contract, you know exactly where this is going after that. Like you know exactly where the rest of this is going. The
Mhm.
other wide receiver, like a more sound target, in my opinion, would be a guy like Chris Godwin, right? He's a similar style receiver, little older. He's almost 29. He would be cheaper. He'd probably come in at 3 years and 20 million ish, a little lower than T Higgins. He's not going to be the premier guy, um,
I had a
but he's a
different name in
solid
mind.
NFL receiver.
Go ahead.
Hmm?
I had a different name in mind, but keep going.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of like the higher end receivers who you think could be outside receivers that can complement a guy like Neighbors. Those two come to mind. I think if you're going to pick one, the more sound choice for a short term deal would probably be Godwin, in my opinion. Higgins would be the very expensive version of this. Yes, Godwin is coming off an injury too, but but that could be an option too, right? They may go for now. He's probably projected to get about three for 3 years, 20 million each, 20 million per year. Wouldn't shock me if he pushes 25 million a year. Especially if Joe Shane is the guy who's paying him. So that's another one to look for. But what was your name?
The name I would watch out for, for a GM who's desperate to win now and probably cares a little bit less about the impact down the road and just wants wins now. The guy they're familiar with, Stephon Diggs,
Yeah.
and might be able to get him a little cheaper because he's coming off an ACL injury. I could see them giving him like a 2 year, $40 million contract or something like that. And I think that's my worst case scenario is,
That's worse than overpaying T. Higgins. That's worse than overpaying Chris Godwin.
yes, because you're overpaying a guy that's not part of your future. At least with a guy like T. Higgins, you're getting a good football player who's young. You're gonna have to overpay the shit out of him, which is just bad practice. Especially out of a position that's really already overpaid. That you don't have to do that at. But yeah, I could see something like that, and I think that's a scary thought as well.
I mean, the idea is, Amari Cooper's a free agent too. There are guys out there who are big names, but some of these guys are older. You can tell their game is beginning to slow down as guys, they get slower as they get into their 30s. Diggs is one of them, and the injuries are something to be worried about. But yeah, a desperate GM may pay for these guys, and these are real like these are landmines right in front of Joe Shane that he could easily step on with the path he's on. Another position he has to shore up, as we all know, is the offensive line. It's still not shored up. And right now they had Greg Van Roten play every one of their snaps this year. And he did a fine job. He was solid. He wasn't great, but he was fine. Next to him is a center who has not developed, Joe Shane's draft pick, John Michael Schmidt, who, I thought he'd be better than this. Um, I think we all did. We thought he'd at least be an average center, and he's not. They need to shore up the interior. They've already paid John Runyon. You've got a Luminer under contract at tackle. You're going to need to address tackle in some way because Andrew Thomas cannot stay healthy. So you're going to probably have to pay a tackle and a guard. One option, the guard, the best offensive lineman in this class is the guy that I mentioned earlier that they refused to take this, in the 2021 draft, despite a very stupid reason, in my opinion, from a medical standpoint. Um, Trey Smith. Trey Smith from Kansas City, one of the best guards in the country. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent. He is only 25 years old. He's projected to get 4 years, 20.5 million. I think that's an underestimate. I think he's going to be more like 22 to 24 million per year at a 4 year contract. Easily would be the most sought after offensive lineman in this class. Would you be opposed to Joe Shane going after him?
No, that if there was somebody I'd be willing to overpay. Although you'd be spending a lot of money on this O line. It's a damn shame this guy can't draft his own players there. But But no, if we were going to spend on somebody, Trey Smith is a guy that I would go after. But I think there's a lot of fan bases saying the same thing right now because
We'll drive up the price.
offensive line is a league wide issue, and Trey Smith is a very good player. I think I have a feeling we're not going to walk away with Trey Smith. I have a feeling we're going to end up going after, one of these other offensive linemen. Might get stuck with an older guy like a Kevin Zeitler. Maybe they think Mekhi Becton suddenly fixed because with Jeff Stoutland. I'll be honest, that's not something I would want to take a risk on, is that he's going to suddenly be the same player he was in Philadelphia once you take him out from that infrastructure. But there's names like that out there. I don't think the Bears let Tevin Jenkins go, but he's going to spend.
And in the tackle position, you need somebody, right? Like you either have to draft someone, or you have to believe Evan Neal is someone. Doesn't seem like they believe he's someone. Maybe they do. I don't know. I'm giving myself a thumbs down. I don't know how I did that. Or you have to pay someone, right? And the names out there, guys like Ronnie Stanley, he's getting up there. He's getting long in the tooth. Garrett Bowles, he's a little young. Oh, actually, no, he's actually about 33 himself. And
Yeah,
Cam Robinson.
He was old when he came in the league.
Yeah, so these are the guys out there, and he may decide to pay one of them. You don't know what he's capable of doing right now. I think the smart play would just be to sign Tyree Phillips to make sure you have a backup plan. You have a Luminor here. You have Neal for whatever. So I don't know what they're going to do with that guy at this point. They wasted another year of Evan Neal. They still don't know what the hell he is. They seem to think he's a tackle, even though he doesn't really do a great job at tackle. I don't know. I'm just not even going to include him in my analysis at this point. But they may spend on these guys, right? They need a D lineman. They need 2 D linemen. They really do. Their defensive line is Dexter Lawrence and nobody. They need 2 guys. Now you can see them drafting somebody. It's a decent draft class. They may draft someone in the first round. We'll get to that in the draft class. But you're going to have to bring in somebody that has some talent. You cannot go into the season with guys like DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley getting significant snaps, or Nacho. You cannot do that again. You see what happens to our run defense. It's horrendous. It doesn't matter who the coach is. You give that coach this talent, they are going to get smoked. Right? So a guy like BJ Hill is going to be out there. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the guy we signed. Former Giant. We traded him for Billy Price. What a great trade, Gabe Gettleman. That was also in 2021. Unrestricted free agent. I'm sure BJ Hill's going to get paid. He's going to probably get like what, 18 million a year, 20 million. He'll get a lot of money.
I think. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe from us. I think
that's
probably
what I'm talking
15
about.
million number. Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about from us, right? Like there's going to be a Joe Shane tax, but BJ Hill. Why BJ Hill? Well, he's good, number one, but also if we lose, Shane Bowen like we're supposed to, the most likely candidate for the DC job is probably Lou Anarumo, the former DC from Cincinnati,
Good point.
Who just got fired, but by all accounts is a pretty well respected name as a defensive coordinator. I don't think he's a guy that suddenly forgot how to coach. I just think he couldn't work with the talent he had in Cincinnati. They needed a change. That's fine. His son is a scout for the Giants. He has long-term ties to the Giants. He has ties with Joe Shane, apparently, going back to Miami. I can see a world where Lou Anarumo comes in as our DC, and his input is, I need D tackles to run this defense, and I would like you to bring in somebody. Bring in BJ Hill. I know how to work him. I'll put him next to Dexter Lawrence the way he was supposed to be years ago. But you're going to pay a premium for him. So I think it's realistic to expect that they'll pay for at least 1 premium lineman, 1 premium receiver, 1 pretty expensive D lineman, and guess what else? A cornerback. You need a cornerback in some capacity. I don't know how they're going to get one, man. Deontay Banks, I haven't given up on this guy. I'm not as harsh on him as others. I really feel like he's a product of the system, and his, confidence is a big deal at the cornerback position. And the different styles of play really mess with him. He's definitely not a cornerback 1. He's not a lockdown against number ones, and he can run with anybody, but he doesn't turn around, so he can't be that guy. But I think if they get a different style of coach, maybe it'll help him. I don't know if Lou Anarumo's style is going to help him, but you still need an upgrade at cornerback, right? So are you going to draft someone to make your cornerback one, or are you going to pay for it, right? If you're trying to win, you're probably going to pay for it.
Yep, because rookie corners aren't going to help you, and you might have to end up overpaying for a B-level player, and that's what you do in free
Yeah,
agency.
so you're talking about guys like DJ Reed from the Jets, Shavarius Ward, Rasul Douglas, Carlton Davis. All good players. None of them bad players. Each one projected to make somewhere between like, you know, 14 to 16 million a year, somewhere in that territory. One of them is going to make up money with the Giants. I'm pretty confident one of those four is going to be a Giant. I'd be very surprised if one of those four was not a Giant. I'm pretty sure that the Giants would be paying on the upper end of that value. You know,
Yeah.
16 to 17 million for one of them. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd throw in maybe like a guy like Byron Murphy is another guy I would throw in there. But yeah, I agree. Like, yeah, probably around like 16 million per year, whoever you're going to bring in a cornerback. It's a big need. And then, the last one, I want to touch on is the quarterback position. They can't go into the draft without addressing the quarterback position in some shape or form. So, I don't necessarily think they'll be in the Sam Darnold conversation. I think he's going to end up being traded, to be honest, if not kept. And that's possible. I think Justin Fields is a name a lot of fans point out to. And then there's the rest of that, 2021 draft class. Trey Lance,
Everybody but Trevor Lawrence is available.
Yeah, and
Mac Jones, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, they're all there.
One thing one of my buddies pointed out, and I kind of forgot about, worth monitoring. I know this isn't going to excite a lot of Giants fans, but Brian Daboll coached Mac Jones at Alabama. He was Mac Jones' coach, Mac Jones' redshirt freshman year. So there's a connection there. Not a very exciting player, not a very high upside player, but connection to watch this offseason.
It's worth mentioning one other name that a gentleman in the chat, somebody in the chat put in, is it's a one that we should discuss, which is Aaron Rodgers. Now we talk about Hail Marys, Mr. Hail Mary himself.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers is by far the most talented quarterback on the free agent market. Like, it's not even close. For 1 year, he's the most talented guy that I think is, now he's a head case. He may be physically washed compared to what he was before. But he showed you glimpses in the season that he still got some of that Aaron Rodgers juice. The problem with him is he's toxic, and he comes with a big headache. He comes with a Pat McAfee show. He comes with his crazy podcast. He comes with his Joe Rogan like appearances instead of being at practice. And he won't come to practice. He won't come to camp. Like he's a mess, right? And I don't know if you want that in a win now season, but at the end of the day, he's a very talented quarterback, right? And
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if I don't know if they're gonna do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're thinking about it. Like, do we just bite the bullet and try to bring in Aaron Rodgers for 1 year? For 1 year, because he's the best we can find, and it's not a long-term commitment. We'll just pay the guy for a year. We'll push the cap back. We don't care about the cap anymore, and let's just try. What do you think about that?
It's an interesting theory, man, because he's going to be available most likely.
Yeah.
Unless he retires, he will be available. He's not going to be back with the Jets. He's already in New York, so he wouldn't have to move. Makes your pitch a little bit easier. And like you said, he's going to be your best chance of competing this year. If they want to save their jobs, you risk everything that Aaron Rodgers brings with him. And every one of those things that he brings with you can get you fired. But if he plays to the level that Aaron Rodgers can play to, 2 years now removed from the Achilles, he can potentially get you that playoff appearance that you need to save your job. I'll say, as far as my opinion on it, I'm not necessarily interested in Aaron Rodgers, but I will say, we want to talk something I want to talk about too is, the idea how desperate they might be going into the draft to get a quarterback. And although I don't love the idea of getting Aaron Rodgers, if it's might keep us from, forcing something and giving up a lot of future assets that, I can deal with 1 year of that guy. And if he's good, awesome. If he's not, then he gets everyone fired. So
Do you hear the conversation we're having, people?
no,
This is the
this is
most
where we're at.
depressing. This is toxic. This is awful. Like this is where we are, right? And it's a great segue to talk about the draft strategy for a second. But before we do, just think about what we just said. Every position we mentioned, there's nothing crazy about what we said if the goal is to try to win next year with this roster and try to get it to a point where you can win. You're talking about adding a 16, $17 million a year corner. You're talking about adding a 20 something million-dollar a year interior lineman. You're probably going to have to add some sort of swing tackle. You're going to have to add probably a 15 to $18 million a year defensive tackle. You're going to have to add a wide receiver that probably costs in upwards of 25 plus million a year or something in that territory. That's the basic. Like he's gonna do those things, right? I mean, if this mandate, if there's any truth to this mandate that John Mara has given him, it's almost certain that he's going to spend the money for those guys. And he can't pay for all those guys with this 55 million in cap space. What he's about to do is he's about to give them all minimal cap hits for next year and push that money into next year and push that money into 2026 and 2027. Like he's going to push money on these guys so he can take one last swing at this thing. I mean, I think you can book those things happening. And John Mara has never stopped those things from happening before. In fact, he's encouraging it right now.
Exactly. Yeah, I
So,
think John Mara would be all for it because he wants to see a competitive football team. He doesn't care about the damage.
right. And they can't go, like you said, with the quarterback position, they can't go into the draft needy. They need to have a solution. They need not just a bridge quarterback solution. Bridge quarterbacks are for soundly run teams that know that they're going to rebuild and they're going to have somebody in place that they can trust to hold down the fort for a little bit, but they're not trying to win games as their priority. That's not their main priority. They go into the draft with a body they can trust, but they're still trying to upgrade and they're thinking clearly. That's what bridge quarterbacks are for. If you're trying to win games, you're not bringing in Jacoby Brissett. You're not bringing in guys like Marcus Mariota, most likely, right? That would be insane. You're not going to do that. What you're more likely to do is swing on a guy like Rodgers, or maybe you swing on a guy like Justin Fields because he can win you games with his legs. And he has tremendous talent in that arm of his. It just has never translated to a good passing game. But you think that maybe with Brian Daboll and the offense he likes to run, he fits it, right? He may be able to use him like 2022 Daniel Jones. That's probably, in fact, when you think about it, that's probably the fastest way they could win football games is run that offense and see if you can do it. You don't have Saquon Barkley anymore. That might be a draft strategy thing where you try to get a big time running back, early in the draft. Who knows? Right? But that might be a way you try to solve the problem of winning for next year. The only way I can see that is if they spend like maniacs in free agency. That's the only way I can see them being able to have some sort of chance to win next year, which is really bad for the long run. Really bad. These are not good choices. Then you go into the draft. You have the third overall pick. This is where it gets really expensive. You feel like that was expensive. Here's where things get really expensive. We all know they covet Shadur Sanders. Like they've made no secret of that. They pissed away the number one overall pick because they just had to win that game a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
Tennessee's sitting at number one, Cleveland's at number two. We don't know if either team is going quarterback, but they're sitting on the asset. Tennessee just fired their GM and they have what it will be a second-year head coach in Brian Callahan with a new GM who presumably he will have significant input in picking. I don't know what Brian Callahan thinks of these quarterbacks. And I don't think it particularly matters because if he wants one of them, he will take them, right?
Yep.
If he wants them, he'll take them. And that's just one less quarterback you have access to. But if he's not sure, and they're thinking to themselves, you know what, we can get some real value out of this pick. Who do you think the Tennessee Titans are going to be talking to?
New York Giants, Vegas Raiders.
And if I'm the Titans and I know that Joe Shane is desperate, like desperate to
And
get
they
a
and they
quarterback,
know that.
the whole league knows it, right? They know he's desperate to get free agents to win, and he's desperate to get a young quarterback. I know that he's on the hot seat. He's got to show results. He's also sitting on the hardest schedule in the NFL with a shitty team, which means that he's sitting on potentially a top five, maybe top three pick in the
Yep.
2026 draft. That first round pick of the Giants is a pot of gold, and
Yep. GMs are gonna be drooling over that.
everybody's gonna want it. And if I don't even care who the Tennessee GM is, right? If I'm that GM and I'm not taking a quarterback, or I'm at least considering not taking it, I'm calling Joe Shane and I'm saying, guess what, Joe? You can have your quarterback. It's right here for you. But here's what I want. I want the pick swap. I want your second round pick this year, which is pick 34, and I want that first round pick next year. That's the cost of doing business to move up 2 spots.
And it's realistic because something we've talked about on the show before. It was a study done by NFL.com and Daniel Jeremiah, and they essentially broke down how much quarterback trade ups costed in comparison to the old Jimmy Johnson trade value chart. And they found out that there is typically, don't even talk about a Joe Shane tax. There's a quarterback tax. So even if we
Right.
just use the quarterback tax and ignore the Joe Shane tax we're talking about, it's about 20% typically. So Tennessee's pick is worth 3,000. 20% on top of that, it's worth about 3,600. Giants pick is worth 2,200. A future first typically seen at about 1,000. Maybe ours is seen a little bit higher than that because like I said, people are drilling over that. But I don't know if they're going to give us any more of a break because of that. But that puts us up at 3,200. So we're still short.
We're
there.
short.
So that's when you're asking for the second. Maybe you can get a second next year or something like that. If you can negotiate that or something, but that's what they're going to ask for. And then on that same conversation, Cleveland's the team, they have 2,600 is the second pick, 20% of top. That's 3,160, I think was the calculation I did. 3,120. Our picks worth 2,200. Like what did I just say? A future verse is worth 1,000. I know the Giants' preference would be in that case. Like, let me give you my second this year. Let me give you my second next year. Let me give you a second and a third. You look at the 49ers Bears trade for Trubisky. I think that was 2/3. That's obviously where they're going to want to come in at. But if I'm Cleveland, I'm saying, hey man, I have the Raiders here that are also offering their future first because I'm sure the Raiders would be. And if you're not willing to give me your first, you can keep all the other stuff yourself. I don't care about your seconds or anything like that. I want your first round pick next year. And I don't know. Maybe Tom Telesco and Andrew Barry are not this, or not. It's not Tom Telesco. Tom Telesco's Raiders, but whoever the Tennessee hires and Andrew Barry aren't this savvy. I don't know. All I know is if I was in their shoes, that's all I'd care about. And I think any fan listening, put yourself in your shoes. If you're a fan, and what do you want if you're trading out of that? For me, it's the first of the team that I think could be picking first overall. That's what I want more than anything when I'm trading down in a pick. And the Giants hold that right now. The Giants hold what probably a lot of teams around the league are looking at like, that is my best shot to be picking first overall next year.
A crappy team that's headed towards a top 3 pick with a GM on the hot seat, desperate to try to get up for a quarterback. That is
With the
a
hardest
disaster
schedule in
situation.
the NFL.
That is, I mean, every other GM is salivating, licking his chops, just waiting to take advantage of this guy right now. So there is a world, Monty, where not only does Joe Shane spend like a drunken sailor in free agency to try to fill the roster holes that he simply did not fill through the draft. Right? This is a terrible way of doing business because he failed with Cordell Flott and Trey Hopkins, and unfortunately, it looks like maybe Deontay Banks, and he failed with not getting any defensive tackles. Nobody except for late round swings like DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley. He failed to add a quarterback. He never drafted a single quarterback in 3 years, not one. He failed to add a wide receiver that he could trust outside of Malik Neighbors, even though he took big swings at it. Jalen Hyatt, maybe he's a good player, maybe he isn't. I wouldn't know. They don't play him. So they're probably not going to trust him, right? If the same guys are here, what makes you think they're going to trust him? He may not be on the team next year. He's probably going to request a trade. So he's going to try to fill all that in free agency. And he's still likely to come into the draft, dude, and still overpay in the draft. So he's likely to burn through our current cap space, our future cap space, our current draft capital, and our future draft capital to try to win now. And if he does all of this, let's say he does it all, right? And he gets Shador Sanders, who we both like.
Mm-hmm.
I like him. There's a world in which I'm definitely okay with trading up for Shador. Don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to having Shador on the team. But there's a world where he does all of this. He brings him into this dysfunctional situation. They predictably win 5 games or 4 games or something like that. Because by the way, rookie quarterbacks struggle, right? They tend to struggle. Like even if they're good, they win. What did Drake May win? 4 games. What did Caleb Williams win? 5 games, right? Rookie quarterbacks struggle, and that's okay. But there's a world where they do all of this, where they mortgage the future in money, they mortgage the future in draft picks, they bring in a rookie quarterback, and they still get canned at the end of the year. In fact, that's a
Yep.
very likely world.
Mm-hmm. Look,
That's what we're staring at.
yeah. Look, I know listening to all this, it's like this is crazy, and this is over the top bad. The reality is it's possible, and I would not just possible, I would say it's a likely thing to happen.
A lot of what we're saying is very likely, I would say.
Yeah, it's very likely that certain things aren't going to happen. It would take the perfect storm for all of it to happen, but it's very possible that like basically everything we're saying could happen. The reality though is that's the situation we put ourselves in by putting a desperate GM out there and put them in this situation with a win mandate. And I'll tell you, if people want to trade up for a quarterback because they believe it, I understand. For me, there's two things. One, I don't feel comfortable trading that first round pick next year. I feel like we are trading an asset at its absolute lowest because I feel so confident that we are going to be picking high next year that I just have no interest in moving that pick. And if there was, a quarterback that was like, okay, I don't know if I'm ever going to be in a position to get a chance to take a talent like this again, I'd be more open to it. But as much as I like Shador Sanders and I like Cam Ward, I don't see them as like a talent that I will never come across ever again. I think there's very good quarterback prospects. I think they're similar to the quarterback prospects we passed on last year, which is guys I would have taken a shot on. The other thing I'll say, look, here's the reality. If Shador Sanders or Cam Ward fall into our laps at 3, we will be taking them. There is no question. We 100% will be taking. I will say, me as a fan, I have advocated for taking those guys in a lot of ways. It makes me very nervous with the way that we approach this offseason, drafting a rookie quarterback. I am very nervous we are going to ruin whatever quarterback we take. And I would not turn down the opportunity, but I am not necessarily going to be upset if we end up missing out on an opportunity to get a quarterback, because I do think it could end up being the best thing long-term for us, because you don't give a chance for that quarterback to have to deal with the dysfunction that's about to happen to this organization.
Yeah. And I'm kind of with you. And I've vacillated on this issue. At the end of the day, I think if they fall to your lap at 3, um, they're good players, and they're certainly, as I said before, they cross the threshold. They're plenty good enough to take and develop and see if they're good and see if they're franchise quarterbacks. But the trade up problem is the one that I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
And I've heard this argument. Well, if you're willing to say they're first round quarterbacks, why aren't you willing to trade up? I think that's a little. I think that's not actually as nuanced and contextualized as it needs to be in the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that if you're asking a regime on its last legs, and this looks like a regime on its last legs at this point, right? And they somehow had a stay of execution. They got the call from the governor's office, right? Um, and they're they have no assurances beyond next year. If that regime is going to take a young quarterback and put their hopes on that kid, and things go the way they are expected to go, and how they typically go with a rookie quarterback, where you're losing double digit games, and for this regime for 3 consecutive years losing double digit games, now you're looking at number one, a whole new regime coming in, which is never good for a young quarterback, right? It's terrible to have a new regime come in because now he has to learn a whole new system. You don't even know if those guys want him. And quite frankly, you're probably so committed to the kid at that point, you're picking people for him and you're not necessarily doing as thorough an evaluation as you want to, right? So that's number one. Number two, that new regime may come in and want to do something, but you've taken away their most valuable resource and the number one pick that they would have coming in to build something around that kid. It's a bad situation for a kid to come in if you have to trade up for him with a regime that's likely on its last legs. This is exactly what the Chicago Bears did with Justin Fields. This is the Justin Fields scenario playing out
Yep.
exactly how it did that. Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were on their last legs going into the 2021 draft. The McCaskies gave them one last shot, and they moved up from 20 to 12 with the Giant, or 20 to 11. I forgot where it was. Maybe it was 11. I forgot where we were drafting. They move up from 20 to
11.
11 with the Giants, trade their third round pick, no, their fourth round pick, the pick swap, and their future first, and another fourth round pick, I think it was,
Something like
in
that. Yeah.
2020. Yeah, in 2022. They gave up a bunch. They gave up 3 picks, right? A pick swap and 2 other picks, 3 other picks, including their next year's first, which ended up being a top 10 pick. It was the pick number 7, and which became Evan Neal. Whatever. But the point is, they gave that up. So this was a regime on its last legs, desperate to find an answer, took a swing on a kid who was not ready to start. Ironically, the kid who may end up being our starting quarterback this year coming up, in Justin Fields. But they took a swing on him and put all of their eggs in that basket. They pushed their chips in, and it failed. And then what happened? They're fired. Ryan Poles gets the job. He brings in Matt Eberflus. Fields is dealing with the new regime. They don't have a first round pick to help him, right? And you'd have to believe that if they had that first round pick, they would have taken an offensive tackle, or they would have taken Garrett Wilson or somebody like that, right? To
Mhm.
help Fields. You just don't know what could have happened to that kid, right? If they had that pick, they gave it up. And everybody knows what happened to Justin Fields' career. He showed signs, he showed promise, he sputtered, he wasn't good enough, he gets dumped, it's over. They move on to Caleb Williams. Now he's a journeyman. And that regime is gone, and the Bears are still recovering from that mess. They're still recovering from it. We are about to relive that entire scenario ourselves. We're about to do this ourselves exactly the same way if Joe Shane and Brian Daboll follow the blueprint that I think they're about to follow.
Yeah. We are slowly but surely turning into Chicago Bears, and it's very unfortunate to watch unfold in front of us. And I'll add on to what you're saying about all the negatives that can come with that. Is also when you're trading up for this quarterback, if the quarterback doesn't look great, which happens to rookie quarterbacks, doesn't mean they're not going to be good in the future. When that offseason comes around and everybody's saying, oh wow, well, they don't have the 5th pick in the draft this year or the 3rd pick in the draft because they traded it away for that guy. And now any struggles they have, that's all anybody's talking about all seasons. Was it worth it trading this pick to move up to get that guy? And that's just unnecessary pressure for a rookie quarterback. You're not just asking a guy to come in and be the savior of the franchise. You're asking him to come in and be the savior day one. You're asking them that. I mean, really, that's what you're asking of any guy that we draft. That's the issue. We're putting any rookie quarterback we take in a terrible position. And, I hope that any guy we take can handle that pressure because it's going to be tough. But it's going to be even tougher if we start giving away draft capital that we are supposed to have to build around these quarterbacks. So, if they view one of these guys as an elite level prospect worth moving up for, that, like I explained, like a guy that's rare that you're not going to see every once in a you only see every once in a while, fine, do it. But I don't necessarily trust that. First of all, I don't really trust these guys' quarterback evaluations. But second, I don't really trust that they're making that evaluation in good faith, given where they are with the pressure.
Yeah. It's just a bad set of circumstances to have to make these choices. It's a bad environment. Um, Thank you to our buddy El Jefe. Please hit the thumbs up button, and thank you guys again for all being here. We appreciate it. Another strong showing from you guys. So we love you guys and appreciate it. I know
Appreciate it.
we're a little angry and subdued, but we just wanted to go through this with you guys in terms of what this looks like, right?
A little
Now,
venting session.
yeah, they're a dumpster fire. No competent organization runs this way. They don't put their executives, their leadership in a position to have to work in this environment. They don't put their players in this situation. They don't put their fans in the situation. They don't put the future of their team in jeopardy, but they've done it. This is where they are. There's a world where everything we're saying is somewhat true, but it works, right? We should not ignore that. There is a world where it works, where Joe Shane miraculously becomes a good GM, and actually makes the right choices.
Or a really lucky one.
Or a lucky one in free agency. He has another good draft. He did have a good draft in 2024. He stacks another good draft together, and he hits on the quarterback, right? That's sort of the world where this all comes together. Like, not only does he hit in free agency, he hits in the draft. The players that he has drafted before and acquired start developing. He hits on the coaches. There will be new coordinators most likely here. They hit. Brian Daboll becomes a better coach. And the most importantly, if they go get that young quarterback in the first round, whether it's Shador Sanders or Cam Ward, whatever it is, that kid comes in and plays well above the X's and O's, right? Because we know that. We've seen this. If a quarterback comes in and plays above the X's and O's, all the bullshit we're talking about doesn't matter anymore, right? Because all of a sudden you've got a team that has a chance to win. They look good. Things are coming together. The offense starts looking like it can click. Malik Neighbors gets on tap. The run game opens up. You're putting up points. You have a chance in every game, and you look like you got a future in front of you. And all of a sudden, you can make it work, right? But all of those things have to fall into place for this to be a successful venture. If any one of those component parts doesn't happen, if the draft is not good enough, if the free agency is a miss, especially if that quarterback doesn't hit, if the coordinators that they end up replacing the current coordinators with aren't quite gelling right away, if any of those things don't hit quite right, this is probably going to collapse into another double-digit loss season.
Yeah. And, to add on what you're saying, like, look, we've seen it. We've seen CJ Stroud. We've seen Jaden Daniels. We've seen these guys come in year one and turn a franchise around. And if we get that guy, that could be us. But the unfortunate thing is we're basically counting on that. And that's not something you should want to or have to count on. Those guys are rare, as though we've gotten it 2 years in a row. These are two of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen. It is not common. It is not common for this to happen. And the more likely thing is that they struggle. They show flashes, but they struggle. And, look at the New England Patriots. Drake May looked awesome. They are picking fourth in this draft. Like, it's sometimes not enough because rookie quarterbacks can show their flashes, but they're not good enough to bring the team over the top. Not year one. So, yeah, man. I hope all this works out, but I'll say, one other thing I want to kind of like talk about a little bit here is basically a little bit what we went over last week. And, we've talked a lot about how this could play out, about how bad Joe Schoen could be as a GM here, and how Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen and this coaching staff and all that type of stuff. But, we talked about the real villain last week, and I think everybody already kind of knew. We always knew that John Mara was a problem, but John Mara this week really took what was kind of a guy in the background who was like, I don't know how much of a problem he is, but I know he's a problem. And suddenly took that target and put it right on his goddamn back, because he looked fans straight in the eyes and said, we had the worst season of our career, of this franchise. We had the most losses in franchise history. We didn't win a single division game for the first time in franchise history. We started out 0-8 at home for the first time in franchise history. After all that, in the third year of the regime, and this is in the third year of the regime I hired, I am not making any changes. I will be making no changes, and fans are going to have to deal with it, because I think this is what's right. And he is going to raise the ticket prices this offseason, and he is going to expect fans to keep showing up. And I feel really fucking bad for all my friends who are season ticket holders out there, because this is an absolute embarrassment by John Mara, and he has lowered the bar lower than it's ever been for this organization. There is no accountability. That is what he is. That is what he's said at this point. He has said there's no accountability. The bar is low. He is turning this into a bottom feeder of an organization, and it's despicable, and it's sad to see, and that falls directly on John Mara.
Yeah. Now, I know some people feel we're being very negative. I think we're probably reflecting the view of the majority of the fan base at this point. I think everybody's come around to this. Like I said, there's a world in which some of this stuff works out, especially again, if the quarterback works out. We're both pretty high on these two, high enough to take and bet on. So if they work out, it can cover up a lot of ills. But what we're talking about today, for those of you who can't understand why we're being so negative, is the thought process. This is not sound thinking. This is insanity. And I think it needs to be said. This approach, the willful approach by John Mara to do what he's doing, we just went through it all with you guys. You know it. This is choosing chaos for no reason other than I'm sticking my head in the sand, and I don't care what's going on around me. I don't care that everything looks like a dumpster fire. I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm doing it because I feel like it and I can. This is a chaotic situation. That doesn't mean it can't work. Like I said, everything could hit and it works, but that's success in spite of what you did, not because of what you did. Let's be clear about that. If this somehow works out where they have another good draft and the quarterback hits and all is forgiven, that's in spite of the owner trying to basically wreck this. That's what's happening. So, that's what we're pissed off about. Like, this is a willful approach into a very low probability of success scenario. Very low probability of success scenario. That's not a zero probability. It could hit, but there's no reason for John Mara to be doing any of this. He's doing it because he wants to be gratified. And that's all it is.
And the shame is that, well, our vibes are low, but that's the overall fan base. The fan base vibes are low, and John Mara's vibes are low, and he wants gratification. And a majority of our fans, they're just going to want gratification. So that's what they're going to forget. And I know you and I feel differently. We have a lot of smart listeners and fans who, are going to understand that if we don't have a huge spending spree and we're calculated, and if we miss out on the top quarterbacks because the price was too high, and we take a swing day 2, and we continue to build this the right way, that they're going to be disappointed with the way that bringing all these guys back, but they're going to be happy with the approach. But the reality is John Mara and a majority of this fan base, they're going to want these flashy free agents. This is the only way to bring vibes up. They're going to want to get a rookie quarterback. If we don't walk away with hope in the form of a rookie quarterback, there's going to be riots. And
Week
John
one,
Mara, yeah, and John
they're
Mara
gonna
said
be
right.
going to be planes flying overhead week 1. If you walk, the fan base is already hopeless, right? How can you not be? You're 3-14 after going 6-11 after 13 years of just awful, awful football. Nothing to give your fans to hang your hat on. If you go into next season without a rookie quarterback, I think they understand this. If you go into that, you're giving them zero hope, nothing, and they're going to come in angry. That anger, they talk about the culture wins. Well, culture wins, they don't transfer. You know what does transfer? Anger, apathy, disgust, the feeling of hopelessness from a fan base, that will transfer into next year. You can book it. And they know that unless they give them something to sink their teeth into, which almost certainly is a rookie quarterback, which again, Monty, goes back to the scenario we talked about. Every other NFL GM knows this,
Mhm.
especially whoever is holding picks 1 and 2. Those guys know it.
Here's a good example I think a lot of people can relate to. I'm sure a lot of you guys, especially our listeners, have watched Draft Day. You've seen the movie Draft Day, correct, Sal?
Of course,
Do
stupidest
you
movie of all time.
Oh, so stupid. But do you remember when the GM traded away the first overall pick, and he called them and told them, I've seen all the blogs. I know all the fans are upset. They had the fans
Hmm.
outside like throwing stuff at the
Yeah,
windows and like
yeah,
picketing.
rioting.
That's gonna be our fans if we don't get a quarterback. That's what's gonna happen. That's the reality, and he knows it. And that quarterback, that GM in that movie, it's a stupid movie, was desperate, but that's true. It's gonna be Joe Shane. He's gonna be able to take an advantage of, because there's so much pressure. There's pressure from the owner. There's pressure from fans. They need to get their quarterback. They do their best job in free agency to lower the temperature on this quarterback and give them an opportunity to walk out of the draft potentially without a quarterback and not have riots. There might be ways to do that. We'll see. I can't say does Justin Fields lower the temperature enough? He might. I don't know
Not by,
though. Like
not by
I can't.
himself.
I don't think he can. But maybe. I don't know. I don't know how the fans are going to react to that.
You still have to couple him with a quarterback that the fan base will have to get behind it. And
To,
maybe it's not a quarterback in round 1. Maybe they'll find somebody in round 2 or something. But that's again
yeah.
a lower probability bet.
Does Fields and Dart lower the temperature? Maybe. Like, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting conversation, but it's something that Joe Shane has to realistically deal with, because it's not just the fans. It's not just dealing with the upset fans. The fans are John Mara. You can tell that's what John Mara is right now. He wants instant gratification, so he needs to give them something. And
Yeah, we're gonna have episodes obviously as we go into this off season that will probably put game theory out as we like to do.
mhm.
Probable scenarios, and there will be some call for optimism in some of those, right? Like we do have a good draft pick. It's a class that has some depth in the draft. I mean, there are ways to improve this roster where you can sink your teeth into if you really get into the granular details of stuff to enjoy, right? Depending on what approach they take. But as it stands today, the road they are taking, I would say, has about an 80% chance of failure right off the bat, and maybe a 1 in 5 shot of working out. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. When I
Mhm.
define failure as another double-digit loss season, how about that, right? They have about an 80% shot of having another double-digit loss season. And now they're doing it with guys who are on the hot seat and possibly going on a spending spree and going all in for a young quarterback. And despite all that, I still think there's about an 80% chance that this is a double-digit loss season next year. And that's an abject failure. That's a problem. I hope it's not what happens. I hope the quarterback hits right away. But since you mentioned CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels, you know what they had when they came in? A whole new coaching staff.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the pressure of you got to come in and be the dude immediately. They were just good, but I do think environment matters, right? They came into situations where everything was fresh. It was all optimism for both of those situations. You'd be bringing in a young quarterback into a very, very negative environment where the fans are on it. At best, they're on edge. At best, they're on edge. Um, that's kind of where we are. We have plenty of time for optimism later, but that's kind of where we are. There was another world, Monty, where we walked away from this week and John Mara just simply fired, even if he didn't clean, I mean, obviously if he cleaned house, we'd be very optimistic today.
Yep.
But if he just fired Brian Daboll and said, Joe Shane, I believe in you. I'm going to give you a few years to fix this. You got to get me a new coach. Go on a coaching search. I don't buy this crap that they actually did this exhaustive search for coaches to work with Joe Shane and they couldn't find anybody. I don't buy that. They probably called Mike Vrabel,
Yeah.
right? And that was
Brian
it.
Ben Johnson and
I mean, even then, you're talking about tampering. Like the Giants don't. I mean, Dan Duggan made a point. They're not usually guys who like to tamper. Like I don't know
True.
how many people they call. Like
True.
it probably called Mike Vrabel, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, and put feelers out minimal, and they didn't get much. But there was a world where they could have just said, "We're moving on from Brian Daboll. We're going to do a search for a new coach." They found somebody, and we'd feel a lot better. They chose something else. It is what it is. We're going to have to deal with it as a fan base and hope that this hits. I'm hoping for a lot of out. That seems to be the theme of the Joe Shane era. Outlier bets.
Hoping for outliers.
Yeah,
I
hoping
think.
for outliers. So we're hoping for another outlier to hit. That's it.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
I think you're obviously the number one thing you're hoping for is that all this works out. They nail everything. They get their quarterback, and we are a playoff team next year. And we didn't expect to be a playoff team in 2022. And hey, it can happen. Anything can happen. I think the realistic thing that I'm hoping for is that Joe Shane doesn't do too much damage in this next year, and maybe he sticks to his word to some extent. And
I don't think that's realistic.
and look, I mean, this guy needed a quarterback to save his really give him a good shot of saving his future last year, and he didn't do it. So I don't know. Like obviously there's going to be a level of overspending and things like that, but minimalizing the future damage to it and getting out of this relatively damage minimalized and starting fresh in 2027, I think is at this point what a lot of fans are hoping for. I think that's where a lot of fans are at. I think a lot of fans, they went into this where they said, if I can't get rid of, we're not getting rid of both of them, then keep both of them and get rid of them next year. And that's going to happen.
But that comes with a cost.
Yep.
And I think fans have to be
went
ready for
over
what that cost is. Yeah. All right. That uplifting episode looks to be just about done. We are going to have more episodes coming up on. We do have to finish our reviews. Wide
Yep.
receiver and safety are left. We will absolutely power through those. We promise you guys we'll get that done. It's worth mentioning that the college football semifinal games are upon us tomorrow night. That is, in my opinion, a real great game. Number 6 Penn State versus number 7 Notre Dame at the Capital One Orange Bowl tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. So if you don't have plans, please make sure to watch that game. My pick when we started this whole thing to win it all was Notre Dame. They're marching right along. I love the way Notre Dame plays football. They remind me a lot of Michigan last year. Punch you in the mouth defense, really solid run game. I like it. They're well coached. Marcus Freeman looks like a stud. That's a guy I wouldn't mind seeing in the NFL in the future. He's awesome. Um, I think Notre Dame is going to win this game. I may have to eat crow on this when the time comes, but I think a lot of the Drew Aller hype is premature. We reviewed him recently. He didn't face a lot of pressure against Boise State, and it will not look like that against Notre Dame. And, I don't think he's going to declare anyway. I'd be surprised if he did. But let's just say tomorrow's game will have impact on that decision if he hasn't made it yet fully.
It's worth monitoring. There's a lot of hype out there
There's a lot of
about
implications to that too. Yeah.
if Drew Aller has a big run and wins the national championships as he's declared, it's something that we mentioned about like before he did decide to go back that we're like, hey, like if he has a big run, maybe he could raise his stock. So we'll see. But I think a lot of people have already started treating Drew Aller like he already made that run, lit up Notre Dame, lit up
Let's see.
Ohio State / Texas, and became a national champion, is going top 3. People are already talking to him like he's that. And we'll see if he does that. I don't necessarily know he's there yet. I think next year is the year to watch for Drew Aller.
I think we can all reserve. I have my opinion, obviously, but let's just see how this shakes
We'll
out.
see.
I'm open-minded to change it if he proves me wrong tomorrow, but
Yeah.
I kind of don't think he will, but we'll see. Um, the other game on Friday night is the Goodyear Cotton Bowl. Number 5 Texas versus number 8 Ohio State, a powerhouse game. These are two of the teams that were favored to win their national title coming into the season. They've had their ups and downs, but they're both here. They're standing and they're alive, facing each other. Quinn Ewers versus Will Howard, who is red hot at quarterback right now, and that Ohio State team looks fierce. They've captured their run game. Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins look like they're hitting their stride. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith is a man amongst boys. He's ridiculous. He's already the best receiver in college football, and he's just a freshman. Ohio State is hitting on all cylinders right now. Their defense is playing great. Texas has been a big powerhouse all year. I would say this: everybody's assuming Ohio State's going to win this game going away. They probably, should be favored. The thing that Texas has that everybody should just take a step back and be wary of the outcome here is they have Quinn Ewers, and you may laugh, but Quinn Ewers is a giant slayer when his game is on. And I mean, he's not often on, he's often off,
Yeah.
but when he is on, he can take down the biggest of the big dogs. So if Quinn Ewers comes in this game and he's slinging it, there's a decent chance that Texas walks away with a win here. So I'm just pay attention to what Quinn Ewers is doing. If he looks good, Ohio State's gonna have they're gonna have their hands full. If he's not good, I think Ohio State wins this game relatively comfortably. But we will see. I think it's a Quinn Ewers kind of game. But those are 2 games, 2 more nights. Watch football. Great college football to watch. Um, Once again, thank you guys for being here. Follow us at He's a Giant Pod. Follow me at Queens_guy. Follow Monty at MONTECRI5TO. You have any closing comments here, Monty?
Man, depressing episode, depressing times, but we'll get through this and we'll get ready for draft season.
Thank you guys for being here. We love all you guys. We'll get through this. I promise you a little bit more optimism as we go through this because draft season, hope springs eternal. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week. Go Giants.
Go Giants.